Good morning. I'm Natalie Mcsherry, the president of the Maryland State Bar Association. For 125 years, the Maryland State Bar Association has been the home and the voice of the entire legal profession in Maryland. We continue to serve over 40,000 professionals around the state and beyond, including attorneys, judges, paralegals, and law students. We connect our members and the public with important leaders around the state and talk about issues that matter to you. In this election cycle, we've already conducted interviews with gubernatorial candidates and will host debates with those candidates this summer at our legal conference in Ocean City and again in the fall. My co-host today is Bobby Zirkin, a former senator and attorney who works with MSBA on our advocacy efforts. Our current Attorney General, Brian Frosh, is retiring after an incredible career where he has served Marylanders on the local and national level, and who's had an excellent relationship with our Maryland State Bar Association and the MSBA's Access to Justice Commission. We look forward to having the same with the next Attorney General for the great state of Maryland. And to that end, today, we are meeting with James Shalleck, a candidate to be the next Attorney General in Maryland. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
To start off, as I said, the Maryland State Bar Association is one of the largest statewide organizations, representing a wide array of attorneys. So why did you, as an attorney, choose a career in public service? And why is that important to you?
Well, I've been here 32 years, came down to work in the Justice Department. Before that, I'm from New York. I grew up on the Lower East Side of New York. After I graduated law school, I became an assistant district attorney in the Bronx, which was a fabulous experience, and I was there 12 years. For 10 of those years, I was in the Homicide Bureau, trying homicides. I was promoted to being chief of the Homicide Bureau of the Bronx, where I supervised about 20 attorneys, and maybe 80 detectives in the investigation and prosecution of over 435 murders a year. So I grew up in the DA's office, which was a fabulous experience, the best I've ever had. After that, I was appointed an assistant attorney general of New York State, where I was from Rochester West, the chief prosecutor for the attorney general. White-collar crimes, public corruption, tax evasions, things like that. So my heart has always been in the prosecutor's office. I came down here in 1989 to the antitrust division, where I did criminal prosecutions of price fixing, bid rigging. At the same time, I became very involved in Republican politics. I left the Justice Department, I ran for state's attorney, and I ran for judge, and I ran for county executive in Montgomery County. Didn't win any of them because being a Republican in Montgomery County is a big mountain. But my passion is public service and prosecution. After I lost my race for county executive, I've been in private practice in Montgomery County, but still very involved in Republican politics and public civic activities. So that's my passion, being a prosecutor and being involved in politics/civic activities. And I'm running for Attorney General because my passion and my career is in law enforcement. And I'm running to reduce crime and lower crime and violent and repeat offenders around the state. That's what I want to do.
So what is it about your background as a prosecutor, which sounds like it's been a mix of both street crime and homicides and white-collar crime.
Right.
What skills will you bring from that to running the office of the Attorney General in Maryland?
Well, I'm a prosecutor. I know how to prosecute cases, from homicides down to petty thefts. To be dramatic, because I just have to say it, I know the sound a mother makes when I had to tell her that her child was murdered. And that's always been there in my head. I've always been passionate about fighting crime, and I want to do it. The Attorney General's office can, although the present Attorney General and past Attorney Generals don't take advantage of it, but the Constitution in Maryland provides criminal jurisdiction for the Attorney General to supersede or replace state's attorneys in the prosecution of violent street crime. And it's out of control. Baltimore is over 300 murders last year. Montgomery County, the homicide rate is like 30% more than it has been. It's got to stop. To me, the most important function of a law enforcement officer like the Attorney General is to reduce crime. You know, these families, when they wake up in the morning after their child's been murdered or raped, robbed, when they wake up, from the minute they open their eyes to the minute they close them at the end of the day, they're not thinking about climate change or inflation. No, their lives are ruined by the travesty of murder and violent crime. And I want to use my experience to fight that. Use the office, which none attorney general have used in the past, to fight street crime. That's what people care about. You know, and these other issues are important, yes. The civil authority of the attorney general, important, yes. But there's nothing more important to me than getting these violent and repeat offenders off the street. That's the solution to fighting crime. You know, all these discussions about housing issues and education, yes, they're important, but these violent and repeat offenders have to be removed from the streets. There's about 400 lawyers in the Attorney General's office. I want to create a major offense bureau to go into these counties, Baltimore, Montgomery, Prince George's, the big counties, and some of the smaller ones, and carve out these violent and repeat offenders. No plea bargaining, no deals. We go all the way. And that sends the message that the Attorney General of Maryland is a tough guy or gal. And that's what I want to do as a priority. And that's why I'm running.
So what you've just described, you said other attorneys general have not done it. So I guess what you would anticipate would be a redefining of some nature of the role of the Attorney General in Maryland.
Yes. As a statewide prosecutor, that's the role I envision. For example, Mr. Frosch spent years, and God knows how much money and resources, going after Donald Trump for making money on his DC hotel. To me, that's a waste of money and resources. These families that are destroyed by crime, they deserve the attention of the Attorney General. And in a lot of these counties, some of the state's attorneys, they're not even prosecuting certain cases, like in Baltimore City. That's outrageous. It's got to stop. That's my priority.
Well, do you have any other priorities for the Office of the Attorney General other than street crime?
Well, that's my main priority. Certainly running the office, and Mr. Frosch does run the office well in terms of his civil responsibilities. But crime is the main issue. Protecting senior citizens, minors, all priorities. And in terms of the police, in private practice, I represent a number of police unions. I'm a friend of the police. I would advocate for more funding and protecting the police. They're a friend of mine. I've got their back. I also want to hold the judges accountable. That's not a popular thing, but the criminal justice system goes from the street officer who stops someone to the courts. And in my experience, there's not enough sunlight in the courtroom. I want to have listings of what the judges' sentences are. I want to hold the judges accountable.
Each judge by name?
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to have what they do in the courtroom, circuit court primarily, what the sentences they give out. And let the public know that Judge Smith, man or woman, gives everybody probation. The public should know. Or Judge Jones, man or woman, gives everybody the maximum sentence. There's no sunlight in the courtroom, and we have to bring that into the public awareness. I think that's important, because the judges, in my view, have not been accountable, and they're part of the system.
So you mentioned that one of your priorities would be the creation of a special unit to go into jurisdictions and prosecute crime. How would you see that working with the local state's attorneys?
Well, the governor can request it, the legislature can request an attorney general taking over, and the state's attorney themselves can request the attorney general to intervene, take over, or supplement. I rely on the state's attorneys first. We would have the resources to help them. If not, and you can't get their approval, or the governor or the legislature to move in, then we let the public know that the attorney general is being stonewalled and not being allowed to participate in these endeavors.
And before Bobby gets a chance to jump in, let me just ask you one other question. And that is, and I think you mentioned this, that Attorney General Frosch has had a history of bringing a number of cases more on a national level than
Correct.
on a local level. Would you continue to do that, or would that just not be something you would do at all?
Well, it's not something, it wouldn't be a priority. It's not something I want to do. The Attorney General of Maryland is the Attorney General of Maryland. And that was the main criticism I had of Mr. Frosch. The hotel that Donald Trump was, he alleged, taking improper monies was in D.C. And to me, that was just a political effort because there was no connection, in my view, to the residents of Maryland.
And I know I said my last one was the last one, but one more, Bobby, if you don't mind. And that is, given your emphasis and focus on crime reduction, what would you do to, or what expertise would you bring to running, as you mentioned, the other agency relationships of the Attorney General's office?
Well, I think they do a fine job. I've had cases with the Attorney General's office. The attorneys are excellent, dedicated, hardworking. But the priority to me, they have about 400 lawyers maybe.
I think it's more than that now.
Okay. Let's create a unit of as many as I could get the resources for, 10, 20, 30 lawyers, a tenth of the office, top prosecutors from all over the country to recruit and take on this endeavor to go in and just prosecute, no plea bargaining, no deals, the most violent and repeat offenders. You steal your 14th car, time to go to jail. So I look at the offenders that just tear apart the fabric of our cities. Baltimore City, nobody goes out at night. That's no good.
Well, and I understand that's your priority, but I guess I'm trying to figure out how you would balance that priority with I don't know how many other agencies on the civil side that the Attorney General's office has to advise.
That wouldn't be affected. I mean, we have like 400 lawyers in the Attorney General's office, and they'd keep doing what they do. There's no effect on the resources of what has to be done, which has to be done. They do a good job, and we would continue to do a good job.
Let me, if I could, I want to know a little bit about the details of that, because I've heard you speak about this before. So I live in Baltimore County, where we have a state's attorney, and so when somebody is accused of a violent crime, whether it's their first or second or 10th, whatever it is, Scott Schellenberger's office is the one who prosecutes these. There are state's attorneys in every jurisdiction across the state. How would you, I'm trying to understand what cases you would bring up to the Attorney Generals, and what's the, I guess what's the mechanism and what's the authority for that?
Well, the Maryland Constitution provides the Attorney General with criminal prosecution authority if requested by a governor or the legislature or the state's attorney.
So you would wait for the state's attorney, because the governor's not going to get involved in a street crime. So you would wait for Scott Schellenberger to ask for your help?
Maybe not wait, offer. There's a heinous crime, multiple homicide, something like that. We're there. We'd be at his door saying, we're here to help. We can take over the case if you don't have the resources. We're here to take it over, help you, whatever you need. We're here. And see what their reaction is. If it's a negative reaction, go to the legislature, they can authorize it, or the governor. And lastly, if we're stonewalled and nobody wants to use us, we just let the public know.
Well, let me ask you a question. Isn't that just a duplicative effort? Like, why wouldn't you just provide resources to the actual prosecutors and not create a something completely new? Like you have in Baltimore County, you have a very effective state's attorney who prosecutes crime, right? So are you focusing your attention on particular jurisdictions that you don't think are doing a good job, or are you saying that the Attorney General's office should essentially become like a super prosecutor across our state?
No. If the state's attorney has the resources and the commitment, that's fine. But once they start plea bargaining and they start making deals, that's got to stop. No good. You go into a courtroom in Prince George's County, Baltimore City, 50 cases maybe, 40, 50 cases in circuit court. Most of those cases end up in a plea bargaining, a continuance, or a dismissal. That's no good. You got to target the most violent repeat offenders. You get one prosecutor assigned to that case from the minute it comes in the system to the end. Now, you have a criminal case, and in most counties, you have an assistant state's attorney, like at every different, a different attorney at every different court appearance. That's no good. You've got to have vertical representation from the beginning of a case. Prosecutor A has it till the end. That's important too. They may not have the resources, the state's attorneys. But we'll know. I mean, it's like pornography. You know it when you see it. We'll know the case, the county, and the commitment that fits into this endeavor.
Okay. Let me switch topics and talk a little bit about some of the issues, some additional issues. One of the ones Attorney General Frosch just this last week went to the General Assembly to testify on behalf of banning of ghost guns, which I'm sure you understand what those are. Do you agree with his position on that?
Ghost guns, absolutely.
And they should be banned?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there other things in terms of gun control in Maryland that you would do?
Well, I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe there's a lawful way to own a gun if you need it. A storekeeper in bad sections of Baltimore, Prince George's County, they need a weapon, they should have it. The Constitution provides their protection. So I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. I don't think you should have a howitzer, or a flamethrower in your backyard. No. But lawful people who have a reason to have a weapon should.
If
to
somebody,
protect themselves.
In some states, attorneys general have been assisting in going after gun manufacturers and shopkeepers and so forth who have sold guns to individuals who have then used them in crimes. Agree or disagree with that?
I agree if they knew that the sale was improper. But under the Constitution, people have the right to bear arms. And if a gun dealer sells a gun to a lawfully licensed person, they shouldn't be responsible.
Agree.
That's provided.
Okay. Agree or disagree with the governor's proposals in terms of violent criminals, his Repeat Violent Offender Act, I think is what it's called. Senate's passed some version of it, House has not. Agree or disagree with the direction that the governor is trying to take in terms of repeat violent offenders?
Agree.
And why?
Because these violent and repeat offenders are destroying the fabric of our society. Someone who commits a robbery, I've heard and read over my career that that's probably their 7th to 19th robbery. No, the violent and repeat offenders are destroying families. And Senator, that's what I've seen. I used to tell people that their daughter was raped and murdered, and the sound a mother makes is something, you should never have to ever hear. And I grew up I was 12 years in the DA's office. I know what that kind of crime does to families. And I want to use my office to some extent to stop it. One family that doesn't have to go through that is a victory for the Attorney General.
But I guess the question is, how does just increasing the amount of time that's potential in a particular crime, how does that decrease crime, right? I mean, if they're getting, as you said, a plea or for 3 years when there's a potential sentence of 15, then how does making 15 20, like what effect does that have if you're getting less than the maximum sentences? Like it's one thing if you're saying that all these folks are getting 15 years and it's a 15-year max and it's not enough, but how is it that in isolation that just increasing the number of potential years on a sentence is going to somehow decrease the amount of crime that's going on for repeat violent offenders?
Well, if they're in jail, they can't commit crimes.
Are you saying that by going from 15 to 20 that somehow 3 will become 5 or 3 will become more than what it is?
Well, it depends on the offender. I don't want you to think I'm Attila the Hun. I mean, first offenders, kids with joints, they go for a joyride after a party. They shouldn't be in jail. At the early end of the criminal prosecution, we should have treatment, therapy, work programs. Not everybody goes to jail. They shouldn't. You want to keep these youngsters out of the criminal justice system by therapy and drug programs, things like that. At that end of the spectrum, but at the excessive, the bad end, you steal your 14th car, you should go to jail because we want to protect the 15th victim. Someone rapes, a 9-year-old girl. We don't want them on the streets. And what I see in the system, and I saw it, and it goes on every day, these worst offenders get swept up in the plea bargaining and the dismissals, and that's got to stop. You got to target the worst of the worst and take them all the way. No plea bargaining, no deals. And that sends a message. That sends a strong message to the criminal element and to the public The public, you know, there are state's attorneys in Maryland and all over the country. They have decided what not to prosecute. And I think there's a real awareness by the public that they're not being protected. There's a real concern.
Let me switch topics completely and get you off of what I know you like talking about, which is criminal law, and talk a little bit about voting, which I know is a topic of interest to you as well.
I was president of the Montgomery County Board of Elections.
I knew that.
For 6 years.
Let me ask you about one court case that's in litigation right now, and that's redistricting. I guess philosophically, I guess it's a multi-part question. Philosophically, agree or disagree with the concept of legislatures doing maps versus, you know, a so-called independent commission doing maps? What's your prediction in terms of redistricting? I guess those are my first two questions on that.
Well, look, redistricting is a political fact of life. It's politics. To the winner goes the spoils. So I understand that. I mean, I would prefer independent commissions, but that's not in the interest of politicians. I understand that. I've run for office. But when redistricting affects minorities or disenfranchises African Americans, Hispanics, minority communities, that's no good. That's got to be taken on. But political redistricting is a fact of life. I understand it, and unless it impedes upon racial discrimination, you know, I accept it.
So you believe that partisan gerrymandering is acceptable under the Maryland Constitution?
I prefer not, but unless it disenfranchises people by their race or ethnicity, I understand it.
And how about the right to vote? Obviously a hot topic nationally, and one that at least the former president has described as being corrupt in our country, although there's no actual evidence of any of that I can see. But what is your thought, I guess, about issues of voting rights here in Maryland, things that we should be doing? What are your thoughts about your party's kind of, at least if you believe polls, some significant number of individuals who kind of question the efficacy of our elections, and, you know, completely? I mean, what are your thoughts about all this?
Well, in my experience, I was president of the Montgomery County Board of Elections for 6 years. It's clean, you know. The concerns I have is when I'm asked, was there any fraud in Montgomery County or in Maryland to your knowledge? My answer is, I don't know. You know why I don't know? Because people get mail-in ballots. You know, you request a mail-in ballot, you get one. And then you send it in, you send your ballot in. In Maryland, we don't check signatures. You can sign a B for your first name, B, and we count it. We don't know who sends in the ballot, except that we know that you asked for it. So we don't check signatures. That's a problem. And there's no ID. I don't see a problem with some kind of ID enforcement. It doesn't have to be a driver's license. Some people can't get it. But something to show that you are who you are. You know, our judges at the voting polls, they can't ask for your ID. I don't see anything wrong with asking for ID.
So let me ask you just a general question. Is it your contention, I would assume as an election official, it's not your contention that there was any fraud in this state, correct?
I would say I didn't see any.
Okay.
But again, I don't know. You send in your mail-in ballot with a B.
Let me ask you this way. Have you
I don't
seen
know.
any evidence, because there's one of the candidates for governor in the Republican Party is you know, screaming bloody murder that there's fraud everywhere. And I have seen personally zero evidence of that whatsoever, certainly no court cases. Do you agree with what Dan Cox is saying about this, or do you disagree with him? Because
in my official capacity as president, I didn't find any provable fraud. But again, you don't know. That's the problem in Maryland. You take people at their good faith, and the election staffs in Maryland are fantastic. They work hard, they get criticized. They do a great job. But when you send in your ballot with a B, I don't know, is that you? Or your niece who took it and did it while you were shopping? We don't know who sends in the ballot other than goodwill. And with no ID,
how did they get that ballot, though? I mean,
well, they
somebody
request
sends
it.
Right.
You
and so
request
somebody
a
sends
ballot.
it you out.
You get a form, you request a ballot. We send you a mail-in ballot. then you vote it.
Right.
But when it comes in as a vote, we don't check signatures. You could sign, your first, Robert or Bob, you could just sign Bob.
Just to be clear, I just want to make sure I understand though. As an election official, you have seen zero evidence of any fraud in this state.
Provable evidence,
Okay.
correct.
Can
But
I ask
again,
a question? I mean,
Sure.
couldn't any of the candidates, if they thought there was fraud, raise that issue with, for instance, the Montgomery County Board of
they
Elections?
do,
Okay.
They do.
Anybody
And-
prove it?
not to my knowledge,
Okay.
in Montgomery County.
That's because I would think that would be the enforcement, would it not? That one of the candidates who thought there was fraud that was detrimental to them would bring that up with the Board of Election Supervisors.
Correct.
Okay.
I think with the last election, which caused all the furor,
Yeah.
three things lead people to say there's fraud. One, we don't check signatures. Two, there's no ID. And the third one was that at the last minute, the governor and the legislature changed a lot of the procedures.
That was the pandemic-related
Yes.
stuff, so.
And people think because there was changes without legislative authority, that things were amiss,
Did people contest, any of the candidates contest the legitimacy of that election based on those last-minute pandemic
Not in the
changes?
courts, no.
Yeah, that's what I
To
thought.
my knowledge.
And that would be where they would prove it, I would assume.
Look, I'm an active Republican.
I understand.
If
yeah.
there was fraud, Larry Hogan wouldn't be governor.
There you go.
You know what I mean? I tell
Not
my
in Maryland.
Republican colleagues, if there was rampant fraud by the Democrats or the bad guys, in
Yeah.
their view, Hogan wouldn't be a two-term governor.
Yeah.
Look, in Maryland, Montgomery County's 4-1 Democrat. The state is more than 2-1 Democrat. Other states I can't speak to. But I am concerned that there's no signature verification and there's no ID at all.
But your concern is a theoretical one or a hypothetical one because nobody's ever proven fraud from either of those, right?
How do you prove it?
Well, I
I mean,
guess
how do we know that
you would take that B ballot and go to Bobby Zirkin and say, did you sign this?
we had 540,000 votes in
Well,
Montgomery County?
Pick 5, pick 10, I don't know. But wouldn't there be a statistical way to show that?
Probably.
Yeah, I would think. And
I
would-
like your idea. Good.
There you go.
Good idea.
Anytime. I got lots of votes.
In other states, I mean, I guess the only reason it's an interesting thing to talk to you about because of your role as head of the election board. Again, one of the candidates for governor in the Republican primary, made all kinds of comments about what Mike Pence should or should not have done based on his own allegations. Have you seen anything in any court in this country that would kind of back up what Delegate Cox is saying?
Legally, no, I have not. I have not. But, a lot of people really feel strongly about this, and
I always wanted to ask somebody this question, though. So what? So Donald Trump talked about in his first primary, right, when he lost Iowa, he screamed that Ted Cruz had cheated him. I mean, it's like a playbook from the former president that some number of people listen to what, leadership tells them, even when it's a lie. So I guess that I've heard other people running for office say that. Well, a lot of people feel that way. I guess as somebody who's running for Attorney General to be the chief law enforcement officer of the state of Maryland, so what, right? Just because people believe somebody who's lying to them, what does that matter?
I want the evidence. If you say there's been fraud, bring me the evidence.
And there was none.
Not that I'm aware of. Not in Maryland. Not in Maryland,
Anywhere? Any state that you
Well,
saw?
I wouldn't know that, but I haven't seen anything legally through the courts to support that.
Okay. Switch to the environment for a second. I know Natalie's going to want to jump in on lots of issues to talk about. Let's focus on what is it that you think that the Attorney General should or should not be doing differently in terms of environmental protection?
Again, I'm not Attila the Hun, but you have these major polluters, not someone who throws a cigarette butt in the Chesapeake Bay over the bridge. No, major polluters, people that are just disregarding all concern for the environment, poisoning the systems, jail. Go to jail. You're a major polluter, you're hurting, you could kill people. You got to go to jail. Again, this is part of my view that the Attorney General has to be the top law enforcement officer of the state. and the worst of the worst have to go to jail. That's the deterrent. And major fines, jail. Deterrence is the key to major pollution.
Are there specific things that the Attorney General's office are doing well or not doing well right now that you're aware of, like specific issues, like for example, some candidates have talked about the need for more, not just more enforcement, but more investigators, the clean water, drinking water, fracking issues, whatever. Are there specific things that you would focus on if you become the Attorney General?
Oh, resources is the key. More investigators, absolutely. More investigators, more lawyers. The more resources you have, the more you can do in terms of investigating things. I'm sure they get swamped with complaints and issues every day. What I want to do, like we had in New York, I want to have once a month an assistant attorney general at different outlets around the state, like Consumer Affairs, Hagerstown, Cecil County, Western Maryland, Southern Maryland, the Shore. Have an office once a month where people from that community can come in and say, hey, this supermarket next door, they've been dumping all this crap into the river in our town. So I want to have my eyes and ears around the state with offices around the state, maybe once a month, once every 2 weeks, depending on resources. So people can walk in and tell us what's going on around the state. Elderly people infirm, they're not going to come from Cecil County to the Attorney General's office in Baltimore. So I want to have eyes and ears around the state. I think that'll give us, open our eyes to a lot of issues that we're not aware of.
Let me ask you a question, going back to your idea, which I'm still mulling about in my head, of having a unit of the Attorney General's office that goes into local jurisdictions. And I hear what you're saying about the victims of crime. My family was a victim of horrific crime. But we agreed to a plea bargain in that case of a person who murdered a family member in order to make sure he went to prison for the rest of his life, no parole, so as not to take the chance that some jury might think there was some deficiency and not convict the guy, okay? And then we were able to do that because the local prosecutors understood the dynamics of the whole crime and the community. Don't you think the local prosecutors are in a better position to understand those local concerns? And they're elected too. Doesn't that put them in a better position to decide which crimes to prosecute, which ones to bargain on, and to make those decisions than the big high Attorney General's office as they may see it?
By the way, it's a terrible thing
about
your family. I'm sorry
you.
about that. But that was not a plea bargain. If this person got life without parole, that's going all the way.
In order to get him to plead, you had to agree not to execute him.
Yeah.
So.
But I would say generally yes, but there are prosecutors that don't believe what you just said. And they may not have the resources. Some of these counties maybe have 2 prosecutors, 3 prosecutors.
But if they don't have the resources, they can already ask, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'm trying to decide, the Attorney General deciding when to go in and take over, as opposed to waiting for the request.
No, I would go in and be at the door if there's a horrible murder, rape, or multiple offender, and say, I'm here. Let's help. That's the way to do it. Work together. Okay. I don't want to be confrontational with anybody.
Okay. Maybe I misunderstood earlier.
No, our efforts are all to serve the public and the families that are affected. Mm-hmm. I keep coming back to that,
So we hear from a lot of people throughout the state, lawyers do anyway, that one of the problems nowadays is there's too much regulation, and the regulations, statewide regulations. One of the primary jobs of the Attorney General's office is to enforce those various regulations statewide, and that's what some of those several hundred lawyers in the Attorney General's office do. What would you do to attract highly qualified attorneys to come do that kind of work, and how would you train them?
Well, salary is important. That's very important. Salary. I would promote Maryland as a wonderful place to live. I would recruit nationwide. You got to get the best lawyers if you can. It's a great, being in a prosecutor's office is a great experience. The camaraderie, the compassion of a group of youngsters primarily that are out to do public good. So you want to recruit the best you can. And training, you want to bring in people in the field. It doesn't have to be on their staff. But you know, if you're going after polluters, you want to bring in people that used to work for the EPA, and especially in this area in Washington, D.C. You know, you got great resources, former ambassadors, congresspeople, executive appointees, cabinet members. So you bring in the most talented people to train. The resources are here.
How would you increase the salaries and increase the number of attorneys at the same time? I mean, speaking of resources, what makes you think you could get the legislature to increase the budget of the Attorney General that much?
Public awareness, getting the public behind me in the press, get on a bully pulpit. You know, I mean, Baltimore City. I mean, it's terrible what's going on in Baltimore. The number of murders, the violence, it's terrible, and the public would support this. The public will support this.
I haven't done the math, but assistant attorneys general in Maryland make about half what the assistant U.S. attorneys make, all of whom make about a half to a quarter of what somebody in private practice with their level of experience could make. So we're talking a lot of money. You think the legislature would support that?
Hopefully, hopefully, and politically, it's to their advantage. Politically, in today's climate, I would say crime is one of the top issues for candidates. Maybe it's the top: education, taxes, crime. They're right at the top of people's concerns and candidates. So I think in today's environment, this would be popular.
One of the topics that's really important to the MSBA this year, on which we've had a lot of cooperation from Attorney General Frosch, is the whole question of access to justice. You know, not only during the pandemic, but otherwise, there's a strong belief that most Americans can't afford a lawyer. And so what do you do to make it more possible for people to have a meaningful access to the courts? Do you have any proposals on that front?
Well, first of all, I'm a big supporter of public defenders. They do a great job. And they walk around the halls of court with 50 folders under each arm. They do a great job. They're underpaid too. Mm-hmm. And what upset me maybe a couple of years ago, I'm in court, and some defendant, unruly defendant, the judge assigned this defendant a public defender. And the defendant screamed out in front of a packed courtroom, "I don't want a public defender, Judge, I want a lawyer." And that pissed me off, because public defenders do a great job, and they have to get more public defenders, more resources. Investigators, resources. Investigators are crucial to them.
Well, I was thinking more of civil proceedings like eviction, family law, public benefits, that sort of thing. Do you have any proposals on the civil side to make sure that people who have to go to court to enforce their civil rights would have access to legal assistance to do so?
It's a matter of resources. I certainly would lobby and support those that go for more resources for them. Absolutely. Someone standing in court without a lawyer, it's a terrible thing.
Well, I mean, I know you do some family law.
Yes.
So I'm sure you've encountered self-represented litigants in the family law courts.
Well, Montgomery County, we have pro bono lawyers. Mm-hmm. So some of the counties, I know Montgomery does, we have pro bono offices, and they have resources that help these people, which is good.
Well, nationally, statistics would indicate that about 80% of the population makes too much for those pro bono lawyers, but not enough to hire a real lawyer. And I don't mean to use that, but I mean to afford a lawyer and to pay normal hourly rates. Do you have any thoughts or proposals to address that issue?
Well, again, it's resources. They need more lawyers and more money.
As Attorney General, would you be involved in those efforts?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I didn't mean to steal your
No,
thunder.
not at all.
I know you've got a long list.
I've got more to go. We're kind of bouncing back and forth. So, you said that you represent police unions.
Well, I represent officers in the union.
In the FOP.
Right, officers, yeah.
So let me just ask an open-ended question about your thoughts, and then I'll ask a specific AG question. Thoughts about what the General Assembly did last year in terms of, in the wake of, obviously, some national issues. There was a whole package of quote-unquote police reform bills that were passed by the General Assembly. Thoughts about that? Did they go too far, not go far enough? Are there things that they got wrong, got right, should be doing this legislative session?
Well, I was not happy that they basically did away with the LEOBR, Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which gave officers certain protections after a shooting or an incident. You know, they had like 5 days to get a lawyer. They had hearing boards. It had certain procedures that the legislature just wiped out to protect officers. You know, I represented a number of officers involved in shootings, and it's very traumatic for them. After a shooting, if someone's killed or injured, these officers go through a very traumatic period. And a lot of these protections they had with time limits to get a lawyer, to make a statement, protections, were done away with. I didn't like that. Review of police officer conduct, good idea, good idea. I mean, I'm a friend of the police, but a bad cop is my enemy. I mean, I like them so much that if there's a bad apple in the barrel, I'm going after them, because that taints all police officers who they do a tremendous job. They do a tremendous job, and they take so much criticism.
So the hearing boards are still in place, they're just different. Did you?
Well, they opened them up to the public, and certain records of their past discipline and work records can be now accessed by people who make complaints. So a lot of things, I think, went too far to protect them.
So specifically on that issue, on the MPIA issue, is you think that they went too far, and where would you draw the line then?
I mean, I would like to see the LEOBR put back in place, but that's not going to happen.
Right. I meant specifically on the Public Information Act issue. That was a big controversy last year. So if you think that they went too far, then where would you draw the line on MPIA requests for police officers?
To me, all these requests would have to go to a judge in camera or private, just with the judge, to review and make sure there's relevance to what's before the court, and to protect the officer's rights as well as, you know, the attacking entity.
So if an individual, let me just give you a hypothetical then. If an individual wanted to make a request for particular records of an officer, it's not based on a court proceeding going on at this point, but they want to see, you know, they made a complaint, they want to see what, you know, they have an allegation, they want to see what past allegations are and so forth. Should that be something that is MPIA requestable, or should that have to go before, what would a judge make a determination on?
Relevance.
Relevance to what?
In other words, let's say someone stopped for speeding, and they got into it with the officer, name calling, allegations of improper statements, and the person's really upset, and they want to subpoena. They want to get all the records of the officer, his history, disciplinary and everything. To me, all of these requests for these records should go through a tribunal of review, a judicial officer. So the judge can determine, is it relevant to what is being alleged if there's a court case? Is it fair to the officer? Is there material in there that should be protected for his safety and his family? So I would like a judicial wall before.
For all requests?
Yes.
Let me ask you, can I follow up on that?
Sure, of course.
What if somebody in the media was trying to research what actions had been taken against police officers on various kinds of allegations? So there wouldn't be a court proceeding in which to register that request. I mean, the Maryland Public Information Act lets you request information from pretty much any state agency you want to, and they all have built-in processes for refusing, redacting, or whatever. Are you saying that you would only allow discovery of police officers' records in the context of a legal proceeding, or would you still be open to them being able to get for general research?
Well, the requested agency can always file for a protective order to prevent records being disseminated, which I support. You know, officers have rights too.
Well, I'm trying to figure the relevance. So if it's just relevant for a general inquiry about how are these things being handled generally, how do you determine relevance then for a media request like that?
Well, I mean, if it's anonymous information, that's certainly permissible in my view. How many officers did this? How many traffic stops were against minorities? Statistical evidence, statistical reports are fine.
So it's a redaction question, not
yes.
so much a publication. Okay.
You talked about, and it's interesting that we're talking so much about criminal law because the Attorney General's office prior to this really isn't a prosecutor of street crime, but since it seems to be your platform.
That's why I'm running.
To turn them into a street crime
well, that's why I'm running.
Lawyer. So how do you feel, for example, about the legalization of marijuana, let's say, which is before the General Assembly this year? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm not for legalization, but I'm not for jail. I mean, a kid with a few joints, no jail.
So that's already the law.
Yeah, but I don't think it should just be totally legalized. There should be civil penalties, fines, or requirements for treatment, therapy, things like that.
All right, well,
to me, I've always felt, I know people disagree with me, that people that use marijuana, especially, that's a gateway, in my opinion, in my experience, to then trying cocaine, heroin. It's a gateway to higher intensity drugs. But I'm not talking jail for, unless you're a major distributor or something like that. But total legalization, there should be some consequence as a protection to young people too.
So I guess let me just ask you specifically then, because right now, as you know, up to 10 grams is a civil offense right
Correct.
now. So I guess what, if anything, would you do on the specific issue of marijuana, and then we'll talk about other drugs.
Well, and I agree with that. A small amount of marijuana should be a fine or treatment, a mandated treatment program or therapy. That's fine. But I don't think it should be legal. I think it sends the wrong message, and it opens up the gates, in my opinion, for young people to keep going down that track.
Then how about, do you disagree with the medical cannabis program that's in place?
Oh,
in
no,
Maryland?
that's important.
Okay,
I agree with that.
So
I
I
agree
guess
with that.
when you kind of narrow into recreational cannabis use, then, if you're not for legalization, I mean, do you think that our law is where it should be right now, or do you think that there are changes that should be made? And let me just give you an example. Like, is 10 grams the right amount? What if somebody's selling? How about the concern, for example, about the fact that it's not legal, and so people are getting it anyway. They're just getting it on the streets, which is obviously more dangerous. So how about all those issues?
Just to be clear, I'm not for legalization, but I'm not for complete criminalization. Each case stands by itself. Somebody selling, even if it's small amounts, outside of junior high school, that person should go to jail. In other words, there's certain characters, certain different scenarios where jail or criminalization is appropriate.
But doesn't keeping it illegal, in your mind, like having in the regime that we have right now, just simply sending people to drug dealers? I mean, isn't that essentially what you do? Because it's not as if it's stopping anything. I mean, that's somewhat naive. So aren't we essentially, by not having legal cannabis in the state of Maryland, aren't we simply sending individuals to go find their local drug dealer, which in fact is dangerous?
That's a strong argument. I agree, but I outweigh my view that opening the doors to society to marijuana is just not good. It leads people in the wrong direction. It's the wrong signal. Look, drinking is legal, but you're 14, you can't drink. In other words, there's certain limits to what we, as government officials, impose upon people. But total legalization is, I'm not for it, but not criminalization. Does that make sense? Legalization and criminalization are different.
No, I understand. I just want to know where the line is, because if the Attorney General is getting involved in all these things, I wanted to kind of know what the...
Well, the present system is progressive, and I support it. In Montgomery County, if it's less than a certain amount, you get, I think it's a $100 fine. I support that kind of concept.
And how about other drugs? There's at least evidence out there that suggests that things like, I don't know what they call them, safe use zones or something like that, in some cities where, obviously nobody's trying to get people to do heroin, but that rather than doing it on the street with a drug dealer that's potentially laced with things and so forth, that there's an area where somebody would go, where there'd be counselors and so forth, but you would legally be allowed to come to an area, without fear of prosecution. Support those types of ideas, or don't support them?
No, I can't see government helping people shoot drugs. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I can't see that.
Okay. And I have a couple more, but jump in.
No,
if
it's
you
okay.
got.
I
I
will.
know we
Go
have
ahead.
some more time, and it's
Great.
it's
No, I
interesting to
enjoyed
get
this.
into
Thank you for having me.
Of course. let me ask you about the juvenile justice system. That is something that the Attorney General's office currently has a role in through the Independent Monitors Unit. Do you think that the role of the Independent Monitors Unit in the Office of the Attorney General has the correct jurisdiction? Should it be expanded, and if so, how? It's something of great importance to the juvenile justice system. And just wanted to hear your thoughts about that specific issue.
No, I think that's very important, that they keep an eye on who's prosecuted as a juvenile, an adult, and they monitor these cases. Is that what you're talking about?
So the monitors unit goes into facilities, and they do
Right.
facility by facility monitoring and
Yes.
evaluations and make recommendations to
Yes.
the General Assembly. There's always been a discussion about how broad their reach should be. Are they in the right facilities right now? Should they be expanded? Should they get into DHR and things of that nature? And I just wanted to know.
No,
what
I think
your
it's a good
thoughts were.
program. I support that. I do. And if it can be expanded, I think that's a good idea. But let me tell you this. In my experience as a prosecutor, some of the most violent, worst crimes I've ever seen were committed, in my experience in the Bronx, by 14 and 15-year-olds. Brutal. Gangs, murders, decapitations, things I couldn't even want to mention. So just because someone's 14 or 15 doesn't mean that they have that true evil that affects society. Some of the worst crimes I've ever seen, 14 and 15-year-olds.
Do you have any? But do you have any thoughts? I guess specifically what I was asking about, and if I'm asking a question that's a little outside the scope, but I am interested in the Juvenile Justice Monitoring Unit, which it's a big part of the Attorney General.
No,
it's kind of
good.
the one big thing that the AG has a role in juvenile justice, because they don't prosecute juvenile crime. Like, that's not a role that the Attorney General has. So I guess, is there anything that you would specifically do with the monitors unit, or do you think that they're kind of set up in the correct way?
I mean, I don't know the exact, protocols they have, but conceptually I agree with that. I mean, coupled with their monitors, therapists, counselors, to make the right decisions to get these juveniles on the right path is a good thing. It's a good thing. I don't know the details of what they're doing, but if they're monitoring juveniles with the goal of getting them on the right path, I'm good. That's good.
Okay.
Let's switch gears on you for
Sure,
one
of
sec.
course.
Long ago, when I started practicing law, when I was a young lawyer, it used to be traditional for young lawyers to spend a couple years working in the Attorney General's office or in the U.S. Attorney's office or some other governmental agency. More recently, the Attorney General's office seems to have become more of a career path than a place you would go to for a couple years to get experience. Do you see benefits to one or the other of those models? And if so, which one do you think is more desirable?
Well, I come from the model that after law school, I've always recommended start in a public defender's office or a DA's office. I was out of law school like a month, and I was trying cases in the Bronx DA's office in night court. So you get the trial experience, the camaraderie of working with a group. So DA's office, prosecutor, federal, public defender, they're great places to start to learn, gain confidence. I was thrown into court. I didn't know what I was doing, and I had a case. The prosecutor that was monitoring me, my guiding, my supervisor, went out for lunch or to the bathroom, and the judge says, "All right, Mr. Shalleck, next case." So as the officers walk into the stand, I said, "What happened?" And he gets on the stand. I said, "What happened?" My first trial. So you learn confidence, how to try cases, people skills, great place to start, and then go into private or other entities. That's a great place to start.
I agree with you there. I'm thinking more of benefit to the Attorney General's office of bringing in people a little older than that, but who are looking to broaden their experience with state government for a couple of years, so that they can go back then and take that experience back with them. But bring with them to the AG's office at the same time a level of professionalism and experience from a different perspective than the career folks might have. Do you see that as being beneficial, or
Oh,
no?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if someone's practicing with an environmental law firm and they want to go into government, that would be a great transition to the environmental units in the Attorney General's office. So it's a benefit.
So what would you do to try to encourage people to do that? if you were the Attorney General?
Depending on the need. You know, if we're beefing up the environmental section, we want to recruit lawyers from environmental law firms. Yeah, it's by need, absolutely. I would recruit in those areas. Sometimes, though, people in a certain area, though, want to get out of that practice. But if you want to stay in it, that's a great transition.
So anything else that you would like to cover that we haven't asked you about before we
No, I thank you for having me. You know, I just don't want you to get the impression that I'm Attila the Hun.
You've said that a couple times.
No, because you know, I give speeches, and I don't want people to think that. But
yeah.
you know, there's such horrible crime in Maryland that we've got to just go in there and do it without theories and discussions and concepts, and take the worst of the worst and the repeat offenders off the street, so there's no more mothers making that sound. And I know it sounds dramatic and, you know, whatever, but it's true. I've been there, and that's got to stop. And if we can use that office to send that message and do what we can do, you know, you protect one family, you're a winner. And that's my view. In terms of the civil functions, and I have no complaint that the attorney generals do a great job, they're good lawyers, but it's the priority. I don't care who I run against. And if people don't like my philosophy, you know, don't vote for me. But this is what I want to spread in this election, my priority, and I think people will be receptive. But thank you for having me.
Well, and thank you so much for coming today and for taking the time to share your views with us and with the people of Maryland.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.